Welcome back to another episode of Keeping It Legal. Hi, Mr. Hudson.
What's up? What's up? What's up, guys? I am back, or we are back with Keeping It Legal.
Yes, and today we'll be doing a deep dive into our very first topic, asylum.
Asylum, yes. Asylum right now is a very hot ticket. It's something that is all over the news because of the current climate that we're living under. And today we get a chance to dive in a little bit deeper and hopefully shed some light and answer some questions that you may have or some uncertainties that you may have as it relates to asylum.
Okay, so let's start.
Let's do it.
So, what is an asylum? From my understanding, I think an asylum is someone fleeing their current country because of persecution, from either a group or the government and seeking refuge in another country.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. So the NIA, which is the laws that govern immigration,
Mm-hmm.
define in not a verbatim term, but define asylum as someone seeking protection from persecution in their home country,
Mm-hmm.
and that person would have either suffered past persecution or harm,
Mm-hmm.
or has a genuine fear of future persecution, and that persecution has to be by way of one of the five designated category. I know you've been doing some asylum with us, so I'll let you take a jab at it and see how many of those categories you remember.
Yes. So
Put you on the spot.
no biggie. So race is one,
Mm-hmm.
nationality is another,
Mm-hmm.
a particular social group is another, ethnicity, I believe, political opinion.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Race, ethnicity will go on the nationality. So race,
Religion.
religion,
Yeah.
particular social group, political opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Right, those are the five. And if you have a genuine fear of persecution,
Mm-hmm.
or you have suffered persecution,
Mm-hmm.
and is at your persecution was a result of one of those five categories, then you could apply and would likely be granted asylum.
Okay, I hope you don't mind. Let's step back a little. Let's talk about the five groups in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can just say race, ethnicity, social group, political opinion, and someone can think about it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have like a definition for each of those so it's clear?
Mm-hmm.
So our viewers understand that okay, if I fall within this category, I can seek asylum.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, race kind of speaks for itself. Your race, whether it be white, black. I know it's kind of some nuance when it comes to Latin Americans, whether they're considered themselves white or black, but the race kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Political opinion are more so like people who oppose the government, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it could be the national government in your home
Mm-hmm.
country, or local government. You have a different political
View.
view. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
your political view, and religion, again,
Mm-hmm.
self-explanatory. Whether you Christian, Muslim, Hindu,
Mm-hmm.
uh, if you're being persecuted because of your practice, or if you choose not to practice a religion,
Right.
if you're being persecuted because of that, then you can have a workable case for asylum.
Mm-hmm.
And then the social group is kind of a working definition.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's truncated. It's very because we're still building case law to kind of really establish
Mm-hmm.
what fits into a social group. I'll tell you, and I'll let you chime in because I know you've been doing some work on this as well.
Right.
But I'll tell you some of the main ones that are considered protected social group
Mm-hmm.
are like tribal groups.
Okay.
In a lot of countries, in African countries, they have like different tribes.
Mm-hmm.
Also, gender. Like a woman, women are considered a social group, and do you know one of the definition of how, like, the definition of a social group?
Yeah, so I would think a social group would fall under someone with like immutable characteristics. So
Mhm.
those things cannot change. It's fixed.
Well, look at you.
Yeah,
You've been learning some stuff.
yes. Yeah, so it's fixed. So as you like to say, I'm a quote Mr. Hugh now, you like to say, no matter where you go, you will always be this. It will
Absolutely.
never change. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I'll give you an example. So, and I've worked on some cases like this personally as well, but a lot of my colleagues, I know we've been trying we're trying to fit business people into a social group, because
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately This is prominent in places like Latin America and the Caribbean, where the gang culture is prevalent, and
Yeah.
the gang culture, they inflict certain pressure on business owners, right? So
Right.
if you own a business in certain areas in these countries, the gangs will extort you,
Yes.
right? You have to pay extortion. If not, they're going to
Mhm.
destroy your business.
Yeah.
We've been trying to get the courts to rule and protect business owners.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the immutable characteristic is what failing when it comes to business owners, because if you are a business owner in wherever your home city may be,
Mhm.
and you are to relocate, you are to move to a different location, no one will know that you're a
Right.
business
Right.
person. If you kind of,
I can see that's hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, if you can compare that with a woman or being
Mhm.
of a particular tribe,
Like being a part of the LGBTQ community,
that
right?
too. Like you, it doesn't matter where you go,
Mhm.
you cannot change that characteristic of
Yeah.
yourself, and someone will know that you're a woman if you move to a different city.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Great explanation by the way about the five requirements. Now I want to touch on the actual application
Mhm.
itself. Do you mind?
Sure, yeah, of
All right.
course.
So from my reading again, I know that there's two ways that you can seek asylum,
Mhm.
affirmatively and defensively.
Mhm.
I think affirmatively kind of speaks to itself, but I know how would you define affirmative as opposed to defensive? I think our viewers would learn more from a defensive because that has such nuance.
Mhm.
So speak to both.
Yeah, yeah. So the two process are, like you said, offensive and defensive. Offensive meaning that you're the literal definition, you're going on offense. Like no one is force you to file any form. No one has indicated that you should file, and you go
Mm-hmm.
on the offense. You're saying that I have a genuine claim for asylum. I have a genuine fear, so
Mm-hmm.
therefore, I want the U.S. government to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
Most people that claim offensive asylum are people who individuals that come to the U.S. on a visa. Right, there are individuals who have travel visa, and then they may have encountered some kind of harm in their home country or
Mm-hmm.
some kind of persecution, and they decide to use their visa to travel into the U.S. And then they will seek asylum by filing offensively. When you do file offensively, there's a different process altogether. You file it with USCIS,
Mm-hmm.
because at that point, USCIS will have jurisdiction over your application.
Okay.
Right, so you still have to meet the elements of asylum,
Right.
which is what we
As
already
we
went
discussed,
over.
yeah.
And I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit farther into the video, where type of evidence and
Mm-hmm.
how strong that those evidence have to be.
Mm-hmm.
But as of right now, yes, you will file with USCIS, and that will be considered offensive affirmative, which is an offensive filing of asylum.
Okay, so now I want us to do defensive. This is a very broad area,
Mm-hmm.
and from my understanding, this is where persons who are in immigration proceedings can apply for an asylum
Mm-hmm.
or withholding removal.
Mm-hmm.
So now, I
And
want you to,
we can leave with holding for a whole video of its
okay,
own,
yeah,
but yes, so it's similar process to
but I
asylum for sure.
want you to take our viewers through defensive asylum.
Mm-hmm.
When they can file it, when is the most appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, so defensive asylum for anyone that are in the immigration court in proceedings. What
What does that
proceed?
mean? What
Yeah,
does proceedings mean?
what proceedings mean is that you are in deportation proceedings when you show up at the border.
Mm-hmm.
I know you all have seen, rewind a year, 2 years ago, you see a lot of people showing up at the border, and they will essentially surrender themselves to CBP, right? So they're saying that I am fearful of returning back home because this is what happened to me. This is what I'm fearful of, and therefore I am seeking asylum with USCIS or in the US, right? When you show up at the border, you are put into the immigration proceedings, deportation proceedings,
Okay.
meaning the government say you don't belong here, you don't have a visa.
You have to
We
go
are
home.
we are wanting to deport you,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in deportation proceedings, you can then you have to file a defensive application to show the judge,
That I can't go back home.
right? Yes, I didn't come here legally.
Right.
However, this is what I'm asking the U.S.
To
to
grant.
grant me the relief that
So
I'm
make
asking
a
the U.S. for.
comparison for our viewers between affirmative and defensive.
Mhm.
Like a quick comparison so they can say yes. You can
Yeah,
separate the
the
two.
comparison is that you pretty much require the same evidence, right? It's the same case.
Right.
You just filing with two different
Circumstances.
bodies of the law. One is USCIS. I mean, not bodies, but different departments. So USCIS, with the USCIS, you will be interviewed by an officer.
Yes.
Defensively, you'll be in the immigration court system, which means you'll have a judge and DHS prosecutors or DHS attorneys trying to defend the government as to why the government needs to deport you. And you will have your attorney with the asylum application saying that this is why you can't deport me. Right? So that's the comparison is the same process, the same evidence, same case. The differences are one is with the immigration judge, the other is with the USCIS officer. Right. And then when you're in the defensive proceedings, you have to go through the whole court case, and it's a lot more formal, right? It's my opinion is a lot more. It's harder to win an asylum because you have the judges, you have DHS who are really saying that we know you here undocumented and we need you to go back, right? And you have to have your case, your lawyer, to help you, essentially put together the best case possible.
Okay, but both are governed by the asylum clock, so both have to be done within the year.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the requirements for asylum. Is what she just hinted to. You have to file that asylum application within 1 year of being in the U.S. Right? That's what you meant. Yeah. Yes, and both will be covered under the same laws. The only thing that's different is the who you file it with. Right. Right. So the same law.
Okay. All right. I think we've said a mouthful. So we've defined asylum, give the 5 requirements, 2 types of asylum, and the governing. Nice. Yep. You want to just go back through so our listeners, know exactly. So what is asylum?
Yeah. So asylum is if you're seeking protection by the U.S. government, you're seeking refuge, and that's because you have suffered persecution or you have a genuine fear of persecution. And we went over the 5 categories, which are
race, religion, nationality, belonging to a particular social group,
and political
opinion. Yeah. Nice. Okay.
I said that because I always know you forget political, which is, by the way, is probably the most straightforward asylum. You can have political persecution.
Yeah.
That's why the law, the asylum laws are put in place, because a lot of, there's some governments throughout the world where you cannot have a different political opinion. You can get yourself harmed. So that's one of probably the most standard asylum claim, which it is political.
All right, let's deep dive into the application process, the procedural process of the applications. Okay, come to you seeking asylum. Boom. What is the first thing that someone seeking asylum should ensure to have on their checklist?
Yeah, so I hinted towards it earlier, which is the evidence.
Evidence.
Right? I will say this now that asylums are very, very difficult to win, especially the climate that we're in. You have to have your, for the lack of a better term, ducks in a row. Right? You have to really cross your T's and dot your I's. Right? So as far as putting together an asylum case, I'll speak to my clients and the type of things that kind of the process we go through. So clients consult with us. They come into my office. We discuss their case. I decide or make a determination of whether they have an asylum claim or not. I then request evidence, right? Asylum, particularly in the court system, you have to be found credible, right? The best way for you to establish your credibility is by corroboration, right? And corroboration is evidence, right? If you have a claim, let's say, for instance, you are at a political rally and you are beaten bad by, we're going to assume, the opposing government, right? You're beaten. Once you were beaten, you then go to the hospital, right? Because of the wound that you would have suffered. You then maybe went ahead and still file a police report, right? So when we meet, I will kind of discuss all of this with you. I will ask you about potential evidence, and we will start building a claim there. I'm gonna let you chime in a little bit so I don't ramble.
No. So from the case that I have supervised, I see where you have a checklist there
Mm-hmm.
based on the claim that the person is claiming.
Yeah.
So you have a checklist, medical records or criminal records of or any text or anything
Mm-hmm.
involving, them and the offensive party. So yeah, and I can see also where that would help towards the credibility because in the asylum application, there's a personal statement of
Of
what
course.
you are expressing to the courts of why you cannot return home and why you're seeking refuge in this country,
Yeah.
particularly this country, because I mean, you can seek it, anywhere, but why are you coming here?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there's some nuance within the recent asylum policy as far as
Speak
if
to
you can
that.
even seek it in the
Because
U.S.
one thing I've noticed about asylum, it's ever changing. The laws are
Mm-hmm.
ever changing because of the climate now. So could you speak to the new laws based on the evidence
Mm-hmm.
for
And, yeah,
asylum?
and that applies for immigration.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of immigration is not laws. Most of it is policy.
So,
Immigration falls under the Homeland Security, and the Homeland Security falls under the executive branch, the president.
mm-hmm.
Right. So the president has direct power. It's really one of the only few things that the president really has executive power over, which is to protect the homeland. Right.
Yes.
And the Department of Homeland Security was created under that umbrella to protect the homeland from foreign and domestic terrorists.
Right.
And that's how the immigration process
Came
and
about.
policies came about.
Right.
But because it's policies and it's not laws that needs to be codified, or it's not really laws that needs to be passed by Congress,
Mm-hmm.
the president could wake up on the wrong side of the bed and could change the policy, right? Which happens a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there are often tweaks to the asylum laws and
Mm-hmm.
asylum policies,
Mm-hmm.
and then we as practitioners and professionals, we have to go along and learn quickly, right? So like I said, the president could just wake up and decide that he wants to designate this country as,
Mm-hmm.
you know, these individuals no longer allowed to seek asylum, or these individual will automatically be granted asylum.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how the immigration process works. Asylum, unfortunately, and I'm saying unfortunately because people who seek asylum are, by definition, refugees, right? They
Mm-hmm.
are in desperate situations,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's unfortunate for them that they're kind of like political footballs sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a phrase that was coined by a genius who says it is what it is, right? So
Right.
we kind of have to go with it.
Well, from my reading, from one of the cases, I remember them saying something about the south border that they're no longer accepting applicants
Mm-hmm.
seeking asylum from the south border. So that could be one. That's one of the policies that has changed because I'm sure, like in past instances, they have granted asylum to persons that come through the south border. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean they're still kind of, or they're still doing it
Mm-hmm.
to a very very diminished amount,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I may not be aware because there's so much is happening, but maybe they did pause it for temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the president, whoever the president may be at the time, could go as far as just outright say no asylum, because a lot of asylums are UN laws,
Right.
right? You have to protect certain people from
Right.
certain situation, but certainly they could put a limit to it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big things that Biden did as he was exiting towards the end of his term, he instituted a policy that states that if you were to travel through a third country in order to get to the U.S., then you're not qualified for asylum. So these are kind of like the guardrails that could change a lot of,
So.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote good asylum claims,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
What that means is if you coming from, say you're coming from Africa
Mm-hmm.
or somewhere in South America, you can't walk and get to Mexico, right? You obviously have to go through other countries to get here.
Right.
What that policy states is that you should have sought asylum
In the
in one of the countries
countries
that
that
you
you right.
transit through in order to get to Mexico.
Oh, okay.
So pretty much disqualify everyone but Mexicans,
Hmm.
which is that's very drastic.
Right. Okay. Nice. Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
so that's one of the nuance. There are several that have just been popping up here and there, and then one president will come into power, will change
Mm-hmm.
things, the other will come in power, and then revert back or maybe add to, and it's the practice of immigration is just it's like that. It's just very very difficult, but again, it is what it is.
Okay. So let's say, someone seeking asylum, their asylum claim has failed, right? Because what would that process look like from then on? Your asylum claim has failed. What is the next step?
Yeah. So if the asylum, it depends on which one of the two process you're in. If you're seeking offensive asylum, right? If you're seeking offensive asylum, and you were to get your asylum application denied, if you don't otherwise have status in the U.S., then your case will be forwarded to immigration court. So at this point, you'll be in deportation proceedings,
Mm,
and you will have an opportunity to then present your case in front of a judge.
appeal it.
Essentially,
Yeah.
you have the same case, but this time you would be in front of a judge as opposed to USCIS,
Okay.
right?
Right.
If you are already at immigration court and the case is denied by a judge, then you do have the due process rights of appealing. You can appeal. Once you appeal your denied case,
Hmm.
it will go to the Board of Immigration Appeals, where I think there's a board of
How
several
rigorous is
judges.
that? Because if the asylum was, not granted, how rigorous now is this second step?
It is difficult. It's more difficult because you
Mm,
now, in order for the BIA to overturn your asylum denial, or sometimes they will remand it back to the asylum judge, is if the asylum judge has made some kind of clear error, right? So it has to be something obvious,
mm.
and something that we haven't mentioned yet. Asylum is discretionary,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
when you're challenging
Hmm.
a
It's hard.
discretionary
That's hard.
policy, it's even harder,
Hmm.
right? So you have
Yeah.
to show that the judge made some clear error, like i.e. the judge didn't accept a certain evidence that was critical to your
Hmm.
claim, or maybe the judge was just having a bad day, didn't want your clients to testify, or
Hmm.
didn't one of the witnesses who had key information to testify. That could show that the judge was clearly biased,
Hmm.
and he made a clear either error in the law or just a
Judgment.
judgmental error,
Yeah.
and therefore BIA will remand it back to the court, or they may rule and overturn the decision. But it's difficult.
Okay. And let's speak to a successful asylum claim now. Your asylum claim is successful. Where do you go after that?
Yeah, once your asylum claim is successful, then you are granted refuge in the U.S.
Hmm.
and you are asylum grant is indefinite, right?
Hmm.
As long as you continue to meet the definition of a refugee,
Hmm.
which what that means is that you can't travel. If you travel outside the country, particularly if you travel to the same country that you just sought asylum from, they're going to take away your asylum grant because they're saying you're playing with
Right.
the asylum laws, right?
Right. That's fair.
But after 1 year of the asylum grant, you're then eligible for a green card, right? So you can file for your
Mm. To
U.S.
adjust your status.
lawful permanent resident, yep, and
Hmm.
adjust your status to a green card.
Okay.
And then 5 years, 4 years because they backdated. That's a little bit of nuance for a different day, but they backdated to a year once they grant you the asylum.
Hmm.
But once you get your green card, 5 years, you're then eligible for your U.S. citizenship, and at
Mm.
that point, kind of the immigration process is behind you, and you're able to travel even back to your home country and live your life.
And live life. Nice. Okay. All right. Let our viewers know about, the cases that you have dealt with. So I know you've dealt with a lot, but let us know, the cases that you have dealt with asylum, as it relates to successful and failure.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked me this question because I started talking earlier about the evidence,
Yes.
and then I kind of went away from it. So I'm
Yeah.
glad you asked this question because
Yeah.
I'll circle back to the evidence.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you one of the cases that I won. Um, it was an individual from Honduras.
Mm.
She suffered some prosecution because of her political opinion. Right?
Mhm.
She was beaten by the police, and she tried to avail herself of the laws.
Mhm.
And she tried to file a lawsuit against them. She filed police reports. As you may imagine, it just made the situation worse,
Worse.
right?
Mhm.
Um, and because of that, she had no choice but to, grab her and her children.
Mhm.
And then she made a very treacherous journey to the U.S.
Wow.
And she came in, met with me, and then I agreed to represent her.
Yeah.
um, the reason why I'm telling you this story because I remember her, just breaking down in the office once the judge grant the
This
asylum.
is serious stuff,
Yeah,
man. Yeah.
it was very difficult. It was a
Yeah.
long hearing. The
Mhm.
judge grants the decision, and she just broke down. She's quiet. She's cried. She cried. She cried. She cried. But you can tell it meant that much to her, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Mhm.
beautiful. That gives me a lot of joy because she was appreciative of the hard work that I put in for her.
Nice.
The reason why I'm going to swing this back to the evidence because she was able to produce the evidence of asylum. If you're claiming that you were
Persecute.
beaten
Mhm.
or persecuted or faced harm because of your political views,
Mhm.
you have to have evidence of it, right? So the evidence that she was able to give to me, and then therefore I filed it with the court, was one, to show her affiliation with the opposing party,
Mhm.
right? You have like your voter registration, your party affiliation, pictures of you being at the rallies,
Mhm.
right? Those are things that could show that you are a part of the opposite party, and obviously you know simple Google will tell you which party's in power of that
Mhm.
country,
Mhm.
and then you are in the opposing party,
Mhm.
right? So we were able to submit that. We were able to submit the fact that she tried to get help, and
Mhm.
that's another component of asylum. Asylums again were designed by for government persecuting against its citizens, right? So you have to establish that either you were persecuted by the government
Or
or someone the government has failed
to
to
protect
protect
you
you
from.
from.
Mhm.
So in her case, government failed because she filed a police report.
Mhm.
She even filed lawsuits. Right? She filed the lawsuits and they kind of hit dead ends and made a situation worse. They kept threatening her
Yeah.
to drop the lawsuit.
Mhm.
Um, Moreover, because of the harm that she faced, because how badly she was beaten, she went to the hospital, right? And she was able to produce hospital records,
Nice.
right? There is no better evidence of to support your credibility than to have the corroborated evidence that are almost contemporaneously done, right? So what
Mm.
that means is that you were beaten, you went to the hospital. When you go to the hospital, your memory is a lot fresher then than you testifying a year later in
In
asylum
court.
court. So
Mhm. Yeah.
guess what? If you have the hospital record that says
That's good.
patient came in and patient says she was beaten at a political rally,
Mhm.
that right there is the best substantiation you can have
Mhm.
because your memory was fresh then and you
Mhm.
had this the story was consistent,
Yeah.
right? So those are very critical evidence. A police report will say that you file a police report
Mhm.
because you were beaten at a rally,
Mhm.
right? So now the judge is going to believe that you were beaten at a rally because you have
The evidence to show.
evidence to show that are
Yeah.
governmental, well, not governmental evidence, but official records.
So you would say that case was successful because the evidence was used to corroborate her story,
Yeah.
and to okay. So
And
the
she was
not
credible. She was a good witness.
so the not so successful one, would you then credit it to a lack of evidence or something else
Yes.
happened?
Mm-hmm.
Probably
Yeah. So yes, if a case fails, asylum is not granted because of
evidence or
evidence,
lack
or
thereof.
sometimes you have a genuine fear,
Mhm.
but like what I was saying earlier, it's hard to establish the particular social group, right? The
Mhm.
laws aren't there. There aren't enough precedent to say um, I suffer gang violence, so therefore I need to be granted an asylum because if you suffer gang violence, then you are essentially saying that you belong to the particular social group.
Yes.
And then it goes back to what we were saying earlier that you don't have that immutable characteristic
Characteristic, right?
because
Okay.
you can move from the
One
city
area
that you're in and
to
go to the other
another.
city and no one would know that you were target of gang violence. So that sometimes the facts just fall short,
Okay.
and these individuals have genuine fears, right? They're
Mhm.
the gang culture in the Caribbean, some places in the Caribbean, and also Latin and South America is real,
Yeah.
right? But
Mhm.
the asylum laws aren't for that in particular.
Yeah.
Wish it was. It's developing. There hopefully we'll get some precedents, but um, sometimes the laws just doesn't cover the extortion and also things like gang violence
Okay.
or violence within your family. Sometimes this what happens a lot as well. Like brothers and sisters will fight, brother threaten to kill the whole family if I ever see you again, type of thing. Those fail because again, this is a family dispute and you can always relocate. It's how the judge will assess it.
Okay. So one thing I've noticed since preparing my asylum applications is that we have this thing called country conditions, in which we compile with the application. Would you like to speak to that for our viewers?
Yeah, country condition contribute to corroborating
Corroborating the
your
evidence.
corroborating
Yep.
your evidence
Hmm.
because there are certain countries that the U.S. government is aware that have or contribute to very severe human rights violations, right?
Yes.
And there are other countries that it'll be hard to believe that you were seeking asylum and that you weren't able to get protection from the police, right? I'll give you an example. For instance, Haiti, right? The government, the State Department has embassies throughout the world in every country pretty much, and they have people on the ground that assess these country conditions and they write reports, they file write reports and articles on the actual conditions of the country.
Hmm.
We know that Haiti is pretty much ran by whoever won the
Election.
gunfight the
Oh.
previous night,
Hmm.
right? So they're not
So
we're not
not so
sure.
governmental, but like gang related.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm speaking towards like the instability and the reason why Haiti is one of the countries that you will get asylum from because it is known
What's
that
going on?
you're not
Right.
going to be protected by the police, right?
Right.
If you're
Okay.
persecuted in Haiti because you're a woman, you go to the police, not really going to help because they may not even have a police. The police are the people that's doing the raping in some cases
Hmm.
or the persecution,
Right.
right? So because of the country condition, the human rights report that the State Department will publish states that women from Haiti often will not go to the police because the police are not going to help or the police will make the situation worse. So you can use those government provided information to help substantiate your claim as to why you're in a dangerous place. We can also flip that to certain countries. Let's say, for instance, someone is seeking asylum from Australia,
Hmm.
right? You will have a difficult time of being granted asylum from Australia because we know that if you have an issue, you call the police in Australia, there's likely the police will fix the issue, right? And again, if the government is not persecuting you, you have to show that you were persecuted by someone the government failed
To
to protect
protect
you
you
from.
from. Hmm.
And it's going to be hard to make that claim because the country condition for Australia is
Pretty
amazing.
good. Yeah.
They're not known for human rights violations.
Nice. Okay. Well, we said a mouthful today.
Yes, we have.
Let's just backtrack a little to our viewers. I hope we didn't. I hope we're not losing anybody. I hope you guys are still here, still keeping in tune with us. So let's backtrack a little. Definition for asylum. Okay.
Uh, I'll let her
Okay.
give you the definition because I've been talking for 30 minutes. So I'll let you talk. What is the definition of asylum?
Definition for asylum. So asylum, definition for asylum is someone who is seeking refuge in a foreign country because of fear of persecution in their home country, essentially.
Essentially, yeah.
5 requirements for asylum for the application for asylum is based on your race, ethnicity, nationality, political opinion, and belonging to a particular social group.
Moving
All
along,
right,
coming along well. I
coming
got I
along.
got her coming along
Nice,
well.
nice, nice. Okay,
Yeah, so that's a very deep dive into asylum.
yeah.
I'm trying to think if we would have missed anything.
Guys, we still want you to comment. Like,
Mhm.
still want you to comment your questions, comment, and let
Absolutely.
us know, how we're doing so far. But comment your questions because I'm sure you guys have a lot of things that you want to know that we haven't mentioned in this
You know
video.
what we should do soon? We need to do a question and answer session where
Yeah, that's
we
cool. We could
read
do that.
comments or we receive
So we'll be looking
questions.
out in this video for the questions for the next
Yeah,
video.
yeah, absolutely. Or
Nice.
you can email us. You can
Yeah.
look up the firm Hudson Law Group.
Hmm.
Yeah, we're based in Durham, North Carolina. But if you have immigration matters, I can represent you wherever you are.
Yes.
But yeah, so email us your questions, leave some comments, and we'll try to get to it. Can I touch a little bit on the 1 year final
Of
requirement?
course. Yeah, we have some time.
That is a nuance. There are some exceptions to the 1 year filing requirements. Essentially, the 1 year filing requirement is put in place because seeking refuge should be something urgent, right?
Yes.
If you're running away or you're fearful of returning,
Yes.
you will want to get a move on getting filing or seeking refuge essentially to seek permanency, right? So that's what that 1 year filing deadline is put in place for. Some exceptions, if change of circumstances,
Okay.
right? The unfortunately there are certain like places in Africa where it would be unstable. It will be stable for a year or two, and then all of a sudden there's a civil war break out.
Okay. Explain more about the changing circumstances. Explain more about that.
So essentially, you when you first came to the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you came to the U.S. as a student,
Yes.
and in year two, everything is good. You had the intention of returning back home and continue your education or maybe find a job.
Okay, and then something happens
And all
back
of a sudden,
home.
yeah, your circumstances change.
Okay.
Let's say, for instance, there was a election,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now the opposing government won, and your daddy, who paid for you to come to school in the U.S., was in the previous government, and now that government is
clear.
This, persecuting people that are oppose their political view, and God forbid, maybe one of your family members been threatened or harmed, then you can go to the government and say, to the U.S. government and say, I think I'm a refugee now because
this is what's happening.
This is what has happened, and my circumstances
that has changed.
I've been here for more than a year,
yes,
but my circumstances have changed. As long as you file your asylum within a reasonable time of the circumstances haven't changed, then you can you'll be able to obtain asylum, notwithstanding the fact that it's been more than a year. There is a precedent, and I think USCIS observes it, that says if you are in a current visa as well, and you have been in a current visa, you can still file at any point. So again, if you are here in a work visa, H-1B or something to that effect, you can then file at any point as long as that visa was current.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just a little bit about the 1 year filing deadline. There are some other nuance, but I think this video has been long enough. If y'all have a particular question, like maybe your situation,
put it in the comment section.
Absolutely.
Yes, and we'll answer it in the next video.
And book a consultation as well. I talk a lot, as you can tell. So you book a consultation. I'm open to you ask your questions, and then we can make an assessment of whether we'll take your case or whether you want to work with us, and we will try to win as many asylum as we possibly can.
Yeah, the track record has been good so far, though. Amazing. Big up yourself.
All we do is win, win,
win. All right, well, guys, that's the end of the video. Mr. Hugh, thank you once again for taking time to sit down.
All right, video number 2.
Video number 2.
Bye.